It's 1:47 in the morning. You're lying in bed, and the person you love, the person you kissed goodbye this morning, the person whose hoodie is still on your floor, is performing intimacy for strangers right now. Not cheating, not lying, just working. And somehow that's the part your brain can't stop circling back to.
You said you were fine with it. You meant it. Or you thought you did. So why does your chest feel like that?
Nobody tells you how to prepare for this. There's no class, no manual, no Reddit thread that actually covers what it does to your nervous system. There are plenty of think pieces about whether you should be okay with it, whether it counts as cheating, whether you're insecure, whether you're progressive enough. That's not what this is about. This is about what actually happens inside your head, inside the relationship, when the person you're with has built a career out of intimacy, out of being desired, out of being someone else's fantasy. And you're the one who has to drive them to brunch afterward. Here's the thing nobody admits. You're not crazy for having complicated feelings about this, and you're not automatically enlightened if you claim you don't. This situation hits multiple psychological systems at once, and most people have no idea that's happening to them. So let's actually break it down. You had the conversation, maybe more than once. You said, "I'm okay with it." They explained the work, you nodded, you meant it. And then 3 weeks later, you're in the grocery store and someone walks past and you wonder if they're a subscriber. And that thought didn't come from nowhere. It came from a gap. The gap between rational consent, what you agreed to in your logical brain, and what your threat response system is doing underneath. Here's what's actually happening. Your prefrontal cortex, the planning, reasoning, adult part of your brain, made the decision to be okay with this. Your amygdala flags it every single time. Not because you're possessive, not because you don't trust them, because bonding and threat detection evolved together. They are literally the same system. The more attached you are to someone, the more your nervous system monitors for signals that the bond is at risk. That's not a flaw in your character, that's evolutionary firmware. So step one, before anything else, stop treating your discomfort as a moral failing. You're not broken. You're not insecure in some shameful way. You're a person who formed a bond, and your biology is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The question isn't whether you feel it. The question is what you do with it. Here's something nobody says out loud. Their subscribers have a version of your partner that you will never have. Not a better version, not a more real version, but a version, curated, lit, performed, that exists specifically for the purpose of being desirable. And you get the full human, which logically should feel like the better deal. And in a lot of ways it is. But your brain has a harder time with this than you'd expect, because desirability is one of the most powerful social signals we have. Evolutionary psychology has a lot to say about mate competition. One of its key findings, humans become more attracted to partners who are visibly desired by others. It's called mate copying, and it's deeply wired. So here's the situation you're in. You are in a relationship with someone who has demonstrably, publicly, repeatedly been desired by a large number of people. Your rational brain says, this is their job. It doesn't mean anything. Your evolutionary brain says, oh, this person is very high value and lots of other people agree. And then here's where it gets weird. That can actually intensify your attraction to them while simultaneously activating your anxiety about losing them at the same time in the same nervous system. Congratulations, you are experiencing two opposite feelings simultaneously, and both of them are completely rational. No one tells you this going in, so you assume the tension means something is wrong. It might not. It might just mean you're paying attention. Let's talk about something that nobody accounts for. When you're with someone who does this work, and you're supportive of it, which most partners are, you take on a second job, an unpaid one. It doesn't feel like a job. It feels like love. But make no mistake, it is labor. It's called emotional labor. And in this specific relationship structure, it shows up in 3 ways. 1. Protective silence. You don't tell your coworkers what your partner does. You don't tell your parents. Maybe you tell a couple of close friends, and even then you watch their face carefully when you say it. You're constantly managing the information, deciding who gets to know, bracing for judgment that may or may not come. That quiet management, it takes energy, even when nothing bad happens. 2. Constant reassurance processing. This one happens in your head, alone, without your partner even knowing. It's the background process running 24/7 where your brain reevaluates the relationship. They came home. That means I'm the one they want. They said I love you this morning. that still counts. They don't have feelings for those people. It's just a transaction. You're not insecure. You're not needy. You're manually doing the work that certainty usually does automatically, because this relationship has slightly less certainty baked into it by default, and your nervous system compensates.
3. Managing others' opinions. When someone finds out, and someone always finds out, you have to decide in real time how to handle their reaction. The weird look, the awkward silence, the, oh, interesting. The person who asks too many questions, the friend who suddenly seems overly curious. You absorb all of that on your partner's behalf, without being asked to, without being thanked for it, because you love them and because the alternative is worse. But love doesn't mean that labor is free. It has a cost, and if you don't acknowledge that cost, it compounds.
Something slower happens over time in this kind of relationship. It's not dramatic. It doesn't show up as one fight. It shows up as a slow drift in your sense of yourself. Your partner's career is built on being wanted, and if you're with them, what does that make you? The question sounds petty, but it's real. There's a psychological concept called relative status anxiety. It's the uncomfortable feeling that emerges when someone close to you becomes more socially visible, more praised, or more validated, even if your objective circumstances haven't changed. You didn't get smaller, but their world got bigger. And if you're not careful, you'll measure yourself against their highlight reel instead of against your own actual life. This shows up in specific ways. You start second-guessing your own attractiveness, not because they said anything, just because context shifts perception. You become weirdly competitive with an abstraction, the fantasy version of your partner that strangers get. You perform better on dates, you try harder, you're funnier, which sounds fine until you realize you're doing it because some part of you feels like you have to earn a spot you already have.
And they never asked you to earn it.
That's the cruel part. The competition is entirely in your head, running on a track you built yourself.
Here's the trap this relationship type sets for communication. You know your partner is already dealing with a lot. The judgment from the outside world, the stigma, the fake nice people who get weird about it. They carry that daily. And so when your feelings get complicated, you don't bring it up because you don't want to be one more person who makes them feel bad about their work. You don't want to be that partner, the insecure one, the one who couldn't handle it. So you stay quiet. And quiet feelings don't go away. They organize. They become resentment or anxiety or the kind of emotional distance that feels like drift. And then 6 months later, you're in a fight about something completely unrelated. Dishes or plans that got canceled. And it's not actually about that. It never was. Here's what's actually happening when this communication trap closes. You're not just protecting them from your feelings. You're also protecting yourself from the possibility that if you say it out loud, they'll decide you're too much, that your feelings are bigger than the relationship can hold. That's not protecting the relationship. That's protecting your exit strategy. Because if you never say the real thing, you can never be rejected for the real thing. It feels like love. It's actually fear. And the difference matters, because the relationship built on top of unexpressed fear eventually collapses. Not loudly, just quietly, through distance. So what do you actually do? You talk about it, even when it's terrifying, even when it's imperfect. Not, this bothers me and I need you to change. That closes a conversation. But I've been carrying something, and I don't fully understand it yet. That opens one. The difference between those two sentences is the difference between an ultimatum and an invitation. Choose the invitation. Here's the thing about everything I just described. The anxiety, the evolutionary wiring, the emotional labor, the identity pressure, all of that is real. But there's a version of this relationship that a lot of people don't talk about because it doesn't fit the narrative that either side wants to tell. The version where it works.
Research on non-traditional relationship structures, including relationships with sex workers, adult content creators, and performers, consistently finds that relationship satisfaction is not primarily predicted by the nature of the work. It's predicted by communication quality, by how much the non-creator partner has genuinely processed their own feelings, and by whether both people treat the relationship as a real and worthy thing, not a compromise. In other words, the relationship doesn't fail because of the OF account. It fails because the feelings around the OF account go unprocessed, which means the account was never the problem. The silence was. And here's the actual twist. The people who make it work tend to report something unexpected. They say the relationship forced a level of honesty with themselves and with each other that most couples never reach.
Because they couldn't coast. They couldn't rely on default assumptions or unchecked jealousy or vague social norms to manage the hard stuff. They had to actually talk, actually trust, actually choose each other consciously, repeatedly, out loud. Most relationships never get there. This one has no choice but to.
It's still 1:47 in the morning. Or maybe it's later. The point is, you're still awake. Not because something is wrong, but because you are a person paying attention to a real thing. Here's what you know now that you didn't have language for before. Your discomfort is not a verdict on the relationship. It's information. And information has to be processed, not suppressed, not acted on impulsively, but actually processed. Run it through the question, is this a pattern or a moment? Is this about trust or about threat detection misfiring? Is this something to bring up or something to sit with? You're also allowed to reassess. Not out of fear, not out of pressure, but from a clear-eyed, honest check-in with yourself. Is this working for you? Not in the abstract, should I be okay with this way? In the actual lived experience way. Because loving someone doesn't obligate you to override your needs indefinitely. And choosing to stay doesn't mean never questioning. It means questioning and still choosing.
The relationship you're in isn't normal. Or rather, it's not default. Default relationships run on assumptions that were never explicitly agreed to. Yours can't, which sounds hard, and sometimes it is. But a relationship that has to be built consciously, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, turns out to be a pretty solid structure. Most couples spend years building a relationship on silent assumptions, and then the assumptions break, and they realize they never built the actual thing. You don't have that option, and maybe, just maybe, that's not the disadvantage it sounds like.
It's 1:47 in the morning, and now at least you know why you're awake.